Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this video on how to file wage withholding returns for the state of Colorado. You can pause or rewind this video at any time to review the information provided. The withholding topics we will be covering today is when it is needed and how to file. At the end of today's video, you should be able to evaluate the need for Colorado wage withholding and be able to file the Colorado wage withholding returns. Before we get started today, we do want to introduce you to a variety of resources that are available to you through the Colorado Department of Revenue. This includes our website, taxpayer helpline, and email address you can use for contact, along with our local offices. We're also going to be looking at several different forms today, and the most current versions of all of our forms can be found online at the Colorado Department of Revenue website at tax.colorado.gov under Forms. Now, no quality presentation is complete without a quality disclaimer, so here's ours. The Colorado Department of Revenue aims to make complex tax information easier to understand. This presentation is intended to provide general information concerning Colorado tax topics in simple and straightforward language. Although we have done our best to provide accurate and complete tax information, this information is not binding on the Department of Revenue, nor does it replace, alter, or supersede Colorado tax law and regulations. We recommend consulting with a tax professional for your specific tax situation. Colorado Revised Statute 39-22-604 outlines the definitions, regulations, and requirements for Colorado wage withholding. In general, whenever federal wage withholding is required for any Colorado wages, Colorado wage withholding is required as well. Wages that are exempt from federal wage withholding are generally also exempt from Colorado wage withholding. However, there are several criteria, including the state of residency for the employee, that may determine whether Colorado wage withholding is required. We encourage you to consult with a tax professional for assistance in situations where wages may be exempt from federal withholding. Here are the basic criteria to use when determining if wages are subject to Colorado income tax requirements. In general, employers are required to have a Colorado withholding tax account and remit Colorado withholding taxes if the employer pays wages that are subject to federal income tax withholding and an employee or employees are performing work in Colorado, either wholly or in part, or the employee is a Colorado resident working either inside or outside of Colorado, unless income tax is being withheld from another state. This is also laid out in a visual chart for your reference. All calculated Colorado wage withholding for all employees for all locations operating under a single Colorado account number for all pay periods within a filing frequency are added together for filing. Separate returns are not filed per employee. Each return and remittance must include all Colorado wage withholding for wages paid during the filing period, even if the employee's work to earn the wages was not performed during the filing period. In general, there are 3 filing methods for Colorado wage withholding: making a payment by electronic funds transfer, or EFT, filing electronically through Revenue Online, or filing using the paper form DR 1094. The return method and payment method used should be the same to prevent processing delays and errors. A return is required to be filed even if there is no wage withholding to report. If there are no withholding amounts to report, a return reporting 0 withholding should be filed. If no tax is due for a period, an employer can report 0 tax through the EFT system. If an employer remits withholding via EFT, they are not required to file any separate return for that period. Any employer who is required to file and remit wage withholding tax on a weekly basis is required to remit payment via electronic funds transfer, or EFT. While some employers are required to remit using EFT, all employers are encouraged to use EFT for withholding remittance, as EFT payments reduce processing delays and errors. There are no payment processing fees for EFT payments. The EFT payment should be made for the total employee withholding for the period being paid. Withholding payments made via EFT satisfy both the payment and filing requirements, so no additional returns should be filed when paying Colorado withholding using EFT. If no tax is due for a filing period, an employer can report 0 tax through the EFT payment system. Now, Please be careful and take extra care if making payment for penalty or interest using EFT. It's very important that the correct payment type be selected in the EFT system to allow the payment to be applied to the balance due. If the payment type selected is return payment, the EFT system will interpret the payment as additional tax due and will not apply the payment to the balance due on the account. Employers must first register with the Department of Revenue in order to make payments via EFT. There are two methods to register in the EFT system. One is through the Revenue Online portal, and the second is by using the paper form DR 5785. In order to use the Revenue Online portal to register for EFT, a Revenue Online login must first be established. There is no online registration requirement to register using the form DR 5785. Employers who are not required to make payment via EFT can file returns and make payments electronically online at colorado.gov/revenueonline. An employer must first sign up and create a login ID in order to file and pay through the Revenue Online system. It is recommended that payments and returns are submitted using the same method in order to reduce processing errors and delays. If you file through Revenue Online, it is recommended that payment be made through Revenue Online as well. A third-party processing fee is added to any e-check or credit card payment made through the Revenue Online system. For withholding returns filed through Revenue Online, Line 1 is the total employee withholding. This amount is the aggregate for all Colorado withholding for all employee wages paid during the filing period. Line 2 should only be used if Colorado withholding has been overreported and overpaid in a prior period within the same calendar year. Any amounts listed on Line 2 cannot exceed the total period withholding listed on Line 1. Penalty and interest may be self-assessed if a return is not filed timely. If a return or payment is not timely and the penalty and interest is not self-assessed on the withholding return, the Department of Revenue will calculate the penalty and interest and send a bill. An employer who is not required to remit payment via EFT can instead file returns using Colorado W-2 Wage Withholding Tax Return Form DR 1094. When filing using paper Form 1094, payment should be made by check or money order to prevent processing delays and errors. Paper returns and payments must be postmarked on or before the applicable due date to be considered timely. The filing form in Revenue Online and the paper filing form DR 1094 are identical in their line numbers and used for reporting wage withholding. Line 1 is the total employee withholding for the period. Line 2 should only be used if Colorado withholding has been overpaid in a prior period within the same calendar year and cannot exceed Line 1. Penalty and interest may be self-assessed if a return is not filed timely. If a return or payment is not timely and the penalty and interest is not self-assessed, then the Department of Revenue will calculate the penalty and interest and send a bill. If there has been a reporting error, please note that there is no amended return form for Colorado wage withholding. However, that doesn't mean that you can't fix it. We have different ways of correcting for underpayment and overpayment. We'll look at those next. If the wage withholding was underreported and underpaid and the tax due for a filing period is greater than the originally reported amount, the additional tax can be reported and paid via EFT or by filing an additional Colorado W-2 wage withholding tax return, the paper form DR 1094. Additional or supplemental withholding returns received for the same filing period are added together to achieve an aggregate total withholding amount. Due to this compounding nature of withholding returns, any return filed to report additional tax should not include any wage withholding tax that was previously reported. If an employer overpays the wage withholding tax due for any filing period, the employer can deduct the amount of the overpayment from the tax reported and remitted for any subsequent filing periods during the same calendar year using Line 2 of the wage withholding return. Please remember that Line 2 of the return cannot exceed Line 1, so if needed, the credit may be claimed across several filing periods. If the overpayment is not completely claimed in the same calendar year when it occurred, then any remaining overpayment should be claimed for a refund on the annual reconciliation return DR 1093. Any Form DR 1093 filed to claim for a refund of an overpayment must be filed on or before January 31st of the following year. If an overpayment of wage withholding tax is identified after the January 31st deadline, the employer can file a claim for refund using Form DR0137 to request a refund of the overpayment. There are a wide variety of resources and tools that are available to you if you find that you ever have questions. On behalf of the Colorado Department of Revenue, Taxation Division, Education and Training, thank you for joining us for this Colorado withholding presentation, and thank you for being tax compliant.